Make truth the most important thing. Truth, love, taking responsibility, these things, if you hold these concepts, if you hold those principles, if you hold these values above everything else, it's going to be really, really hard to falter in your life. It may not be easy, it may not be fun all the time, but you will be a better human if you make love, truth, and you start taking responsibility.
Welcome back to the Better Human Podcast. Today we are going to have an amazing conversation around what it takes to really go through personal development and growth. We are joined by Andrew Daniel, author of Awaken to Your True Self, Why You're Still Stuck and How to Break Through. Andrew, welcome to the show, my man.
Hey, Greg, how are you?
I'm well. I'm very excited about today's conversation. It's a personal passion or focus of mine, which is personal development. I love your positioning on things. As mentioned, I just started to listen to your book. I can't wait to actually get through to the other half where you really dive deep into what to do with some of these things. But I was chatting with you before the show, and I said to you, one of the lines that really stuck out to me early in the book, and of course I'm listening to the audiobook, so it's you reading it, which is really nice. We get to hear your voice, is self-help doesn't always lead to self-happiness or being happy. And that really resonated with me a lot, because I think in a lot of cases what happens is we as people, individuals are driving through these courses and these books and this thought leadership, and it's almost that becomes the badge of honor for people, which is I've done the course or I've done the work, and they haven't really done the work. So that's where I wanted to start with you, Andrew. I mean, I don't think there's anyone better to help us go through this. So again, welcome to the show. Let's start with that, man. Tell me, what did you mean by that, or expand upon that for me?
Yeah, my stance, I've gone through personal development, self-help for about 15 years. And I've, if there's something that's there, I've done it or something like it. Everything from neurolinguistic programming, hypnotherapy, tapping. I've done plant medicines. I've done spirituality. I've done traditional therapy. I've done embodiment practices. I traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic. The whole gamut of any possible way to improve myself. And a lot of it was helpful. Not all of it. Some of it was not helpful. But a lot of it was helpful. However, after doing that for 15 years, spending tens of thousands of dollars and hours of actually doing the work and putting in the work, reading the books, doing all of this stuff ad nauseum, I was a better person. I improved, but I still didn't quite feel like I was there. And it really baffled me, because here I was healing, here I was actually having a better life, but I wasn't necessarily happier. And it was like the more that I tried to be happy, the less happy I was. The more that I went into spiritual ideas of abundance and manifesting, the poorer I became. And it really baffled me why I could have done all of that work. I could have learned all of these secrets. And despite having all of that mental knowledge in my head, it seemed like my external results got worse and worse and worse and worse, to the point to where I was homeless. After having a software company for 7 years, after being published, I ended up being homeless twice. Wow. And so on this journey, I realized that a lot of the stuff that we're taught and is pushed in our industry doesn't necessarily lead to peace. And it can help, and I think it serves its place, but it really has an upper limit. And I reached that upper limit, and happiness and peace was not found.
So what do you, we're going to get into change, but come back to the story. So you're running this successful company, you're a published author. Where did things start to go sideways? How did you end up homeless?
So the end of my software company, it was based in an old technology that's not around anymore. So the iPhones came out. It completely transformed not only the industry, but I think the world.
Mm-hmm.
And my industry was one of the ones that became defunct.
Right.
And so before that happened, I was already on my way out of wanting to teach this stuff, to be a coach, to help people.
Mm-hmm.
And so being behind my computer screen programming and running that company, because I wrote the software and everything, to doing personal development, coaching, and facilitation, all of this stuff, it was a big jump. It was two completely different worlds. And I couldn't manage it. I just didn't know how to make that transition, despite knowing all of the stuff. And so my stuff was published. I was trying to make it that way, and I just didn't have the right foundation in my body. And so that leads me to, we'll talk about later, of what actually made the difference. What was I missing during those times?
Right. And were you in a relationship at the time?
No.
No. Okay. So it was really the business failure and stuff like that. So how long were you homeless? And then what was that moment where things started to turn around for you? And you mentioned you were homeless twice. So 2 separate times, or it was back?
Yeah. 2 separate times, but still kind of for the same reason.
Mm-hmm.
It was literally just trying to start a business, and just that underdog story of, I literally was, because I had a business, so I had money and stuff before, so I was living out of my car in Los Angeles, and I would literally carry an iMac, not a laptop, but the whole computer into the Costa Mesa Public Library in Orange County every day to work on a video product launch marketing campaign, for my stuff. I was teaching holistic sexuality back then.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so committed. I was so, probably there's a big egoic component of, I've been an entrepreneur. I can do this. I've done it before. I can make this happen. Plus, after running a software company for 7 years, I was unemployable. Not because I didn't have skills, but because trying to go work at Whole Foods as a cashier, I didn't have experience, or going to work retail. They're like, what have you been doing for 7 years? Oh, I was writing a particle and physics engine to do special effects for my software company. And they're like, why are you applying for this $9 an hour job? Like it was a huge disconnect. I humbled myself to go and do that. I was like, I just need work. I need something. Right.
Because most people wouldn't do that.
Well, it took a while, but it didn't work. It's just, you're way overqualified or underqualified. And they're like, these people have been doing it for 5 years and they can do it, for a third of the price. So that was really challenging. And it just didn't work. I was doing everything I could to be scrappy and hungry and hustle and do all of that. And I just had a lot of stuff backward.
Yeah. Well, you hear the story all the time, right? Like, get your side hustle and, focus on your passion and, do these courses and get a funnel and do this 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 and do this. And I hear it all the time, which is, it's not working. The business isn't growing. My relationship isn't getting better. I'm not, as you said, happier. And I think, again, where we began today's conversation, that's what really stuck out to me, which is, in all of the self-help and personal development that you were going through, the realization was, none of this has led me to being happier. Right? So let's go there. What were some of the moments, or what is that bridge, right, between our growth that we're going through and that happiness? And maybe even before we go to that question, let's talk about change, because that was also a chapter that really stood out to me so far, which is the stories we tell ourselves and why it's so difficult for us to change. So why don't you walk us through that, which is the whole concept of change, and specifically as human beings, why is it so difficult for us to change?
Yeah, well, that chapter you're referring to is about our stories. And these stories are literally what they sound like. We tell stories about who we are, how we have to be, how life has been, how life should be, how life will be, why things are the way they are, why they can't be. All of these things, we tell ourselves these stories, and those encompass trauma, they encompass our limiting beliefs, our worldview. It's this life narrative. And for so many of us, those life narratives are incredibly disempowering. They are limiting. Now, all stories are limiting. And here's where my work is a little bit different than a lot of the stuff out there, is that traditional self-help is going to tell you to spin it. It's going to say, well, just tell a better story.
Be positive.
Oh, yeah. You're not homeless. You're just trying to build a business. And so that's a Band-Aid. You know, for a lot of people, it can be helpful, but if you're advanced in this work in your life, it's just not going to work. And the reason is that both a stucky, negative story is just as not true as a positively spun story. And so what we're going for is a stopping of the stories. So it's not about telling a story that you're poor and suffering and can't do it or whatever, but it's also not telling a story of, oh, how great you're going to be and how amazing things are going to become once you get there, and creating another distortion. So what happens is, Greg, what happens is that we start, I would say, immaculate, right? We're born a blank slate. There's nothing wrong with us. And over the years, we have circumstances, we have traumas, where we have abuses, we have just life experiences, we have people around us that teach us certain things, we have a culture. All of these things happen, and we start creating a narrative about ourselves and life and our place in it and our relationship to it. And when we start adopting things that aren't true, when we start adopting a lie that we're broken, that we're not enough, there's something wrong with us, that we don't have what we need. You know, and these are kind of the four big ones. Everything can be boiled down to these four stories, these four lies. Well, what happens is we tell ourselves a story and it's a lie. We don't realize it, of course. We think that's just how things are. We think that's the truth. And then what happens, that creates a lot of pain and suffering for us. And then the positive psychology and the self-help and all this stuff comes in and says, all right, well, now build a better story on top of that. So what ends up happening is, while that is less perhaps depressing, it's another layer of distortion. It takes you further away from your true self. And so what I found out was, even if I fixed myself, even if I did all of these things and I finally fixed myself, well, guess what? Ultimately, it just proved that that lie was right, that I was broken, that there was something wrong with me. And so even though our life improves, it never reaches peace because it's taking us further and further away from our true self.
Right. It's just reinforcing that story with a just different narrative, different chapter.
Yeah. Well, it's, even if you succeed, it reinforces the story.
Right. Yeah. I was such an F up, and look at what I did, and now I'm better. Right. You know, I realized something, and it hit me, I'm going to say literally within the last month, which is, I am not a unique individual to have the story that I have with my father. Because for years I've told the story about my father. He was this intense dude, and he's passed away, and blah, 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 and this is why I am who I am, and this is da, 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 and what I recognized was, as I was working through these different classes, clients, participants were telling the same story. The same story. Yeah. My dad, blah, 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 blah. And I went, shit. I thought it was just unique to me. No one else grew up with this type of father. No one else had to go through these type of traumas. But wait a minute, actually, it is quite normal. And maybe what I got to start doing is stop telling the story. Maybe I got to start to speak differently. And it wasn't just, as you said, spinning it, which is, oh, he was a great man and he did it best. It was, wait a minute, how is this serving me? Why have I been telling myself this story? So you said it earlier, we go through life experiences and traumas and events and relationships, and they all add and layer into the story. What do we do with these stories? I mean, if we can't just spin them positively, how do we start to maybe address these stories?
Great question. It's the answer almost nobody wants to hear. Um, this gets into what I would call shadow work sometimes. It's not always, but shadow work is essentially facing and dealing with these parts of ourselves that we've shun away, that we've suppressed, that we've hidden, that we wish weren't true about us. All of the most horrendous ugliness, evils, despicableness, all of those things that we judge and shove away. Our stories, our traits, our qualities, all of this stuff, the feelings. And so it doesn't have to be that intense. Not everything is that intense.
Mm-hmm.
However, it is one aspect. But the crux of the entire process is to face those stories and to feel them and to penetrate them. So in the work, we talk about penetrating the stories. And so you actually look at it, right? You face the story that you've been telling your whole life,
Mm-hmm.
and you feel it. What's underneath this? What is the feeling that keeps us alive? Guilt, shame, remorse, fear, pain, all of this stuff, all of those kind of negative emotions.
Right.
They're really just emotions. We're the ones labeling them as negative. And if you can get past that, you can start feeling that. What's going to happen is that you're going to get the lesson. Those stuck emotions and feelings are there to teach you something. They're information. And when you label them as stuff that you want to get rid of, cancel, delete, clear, remove, shove away, throw in the basement, you lose access to those resources. Whatever is in that quality of yourself, whatever is in that history, you lose the wisdom, you lose the resources when you dissociate from it. So the process is to reassociate. It's to get back into relationship with these parts of ourselves that we've thrown away or ignored or suppressed.
Yeah. And it's funny. So I was listening to you as you're explaining that. It has a lot to do with responsibility.
Oh, yes.
Taking responsibility for who we are and how we've gotten here, and as you said, maybe separating, if I was just to paraphrase, that the stories aren't always negative, the emotions aren't always negative, but it's about leaning into where that actually builds resource strength, contributes to who you are, right? I mean, we are a product of our environment and our experiences and our relationships. And yes, it could have been negative and challenging, but what do we take from that? Without responsibility, we have nothing. And I think the challenge in self-help today is exactly what we began to talk about, which is, as long as I'm reading books and doing courses and doing coaching, then I don't really have to take responsibility, right? There's always the answer for, well, I'm doing something about it, right? I'm working on it. I can't tell you how many times I want to scream when someone says, well, I'm just working on myself. I'm like, well, fuck, how long have you been working on yourself?
Yeah, right. Decades. Yeah.
Decades.
Yeah, people, Greg, what I found out, because I've done it myself, people hide out in self-help. And so it's the ego coming in and basically saying, oh, well, you're working on it. Oh, okay. And so it's the people that have been doing it for 30 years and they still haven't gotten there. If you've done this for 30 years and you haven't made any progress, or you're just an inch ahead, you're lying to yourself.
Right.
And that's what we do. The ego comes in, lies to ourselves so we can hide out, so we don't have to take responsibility.
So on that note, what could we do to sort of counterbalance this stuff, which is, if we know the fact that the danger is we slip into the black hole of self-help, right, where we don't actually action anything, where is that line between going through the learning versus going through the application? I mean, when is that tipping point? How important is that tipping point? And I guess to explain that more, how do people start to action this stuff instead of just keep learning it and reading it?
Well, I think the first step is that awareness. Are you using this to hide out? You have to tell the truth. We have to get completely honest about where you're at, where you want to go, and what you're doing. the more that you con yourself, oh, well, if I really look at myself and I find out that I've been lazy for 3 years, I'm going to feel really bad. So I'm going to do this so I don't have to feel bad. It's all an avoidance. So you have to take inventory of what you're avoiding in your life. What are you avoiding? What are you in denial of? What are you hiding out from? What are you afraid of? And most people don't want to do this, Greg. It's, this isn't, people think this is just a walk in the park. Most people don't succeed with this stuff. Most people don't succeed in their dreams at all, in general. You have to be willing to tell the truth about everything. Mm-hmm. If you can get uncompromisingly honest about everything, you're going to start moving forward. So from there, it requires that willingness. At the end of the book, in the final chapter, I talk about choice and change. I talk about responsibility, and I talk about the truth. And I talk about 2 more other things as well, stopping and feeling. But those 3 things I started off with are what you've been talking about this entire call already. And so you have to make the truth the most important thing. Mm-hmm. And the stories are not the truth. How you wish you were in the world isn't the truth. Your persona, your image is not the truth. Your victim story is not the truth. Your narcissism is not the truth, right? Your scarcity is not the truth. Your ego, your arrogance, your superiority, that's not the truth. None of that is true. And there's a layer of it of understanding, okay, well, I'm doing this that you got to tell the truth about. But then underneath that, if you can penetrate that, you realize that all of this stuff, all of these strategies and techniques are designed to avoid having to face and feel this stuff. And so when you can start to tell the truth and you make that the most important thing over comfort, over even being happy, what is the truth? Because sometimes you learn the truth, it does not make you happy. I have a lot of clients that come in and they're not happy with what I'm telling them. But I'm the first person that tells them the truth about how they're really showing up. And that is what creates the breakthroughs. Yeah. Now, it's up to them to take responsibility for it and then make a new choice. And so all of those things are necessary in order to move from, let's just think about it and kind of get off on this mental masturbation of just consuming data gathering, and actually just stopping and starting to show up in your life, starting to face all of that stuff you're using self-help to hide from. Right.
Love that, man. Love that. I was just thinking about, as you're telling that, I was talking to a coaching client the other day, and, certain goals, and they began with telling the story. They're like, I'm just really passionate. Super passionate. Yeah. And I said to this person, I said, well, describe passion to me. So when you say I'm passionate, like, what does that mean? Like you're a raging asshole in your delivery, you're enthusiastic in your pitch, right. But what started to come out was like a lot of feedback that this individual's being received as someone who's abrasive and a bully and unwilling and all that stuff. And it you could see the work in the light bulb where I started to challenge the passion, which is this is part of the problem, which is people's stories, right? As you were also talking, I'm thinking about the world that we're living in today, specifically with the younger generation, like the mental health crisis, this instant need for gratification, the expectation of it should just be. Here's a blunt question. Do we see ourselves, or do we see the younger generations having more problems with what you're describing, the ego, the stories, the absence of responsibility, or is it just general people today? In other words, are we seeing this effect and being more problematic with generations behind us, or is it just really everyone today?
Ooh, good question.
Yeah, I know, right? It's maybe
oh no, this is easy as far as taboo questions. It's a little bit of both. So let me tell you this. In general, most people are showing up in the world, in our Western cultures, in the cultures I've had contact with and I'm aware of, there are some perhaps, tribes in the jungle and different countries, maybe, but in our Western culture,
Mm-hmm.
I would say a majority of people are in a victim mentality. I think that is the number, if I had to say the number one cause of most people's practical suffering, it's that they're not taking responsibility, that they're blaming other people, the government, a politician, God, nature, the world, their genetics, whatever it is, and even themselves. So this is interesting. Self-blame is not taking responsibility. You're still being a victim, but you're being a victim to yourself, to your stories, to your circumstance, whatever, to your own self-destruction. So it's not about blaming other people or yourself. It's about taking responsibility for yourself. And most people in the Western world don't and aren't. Now, we could get into maybe the why that is. And there are, if you look just at the systems in place in the past 100 years, and I think generally throughout history, there are certain powers and people in power that benefit greatly from a population that doesn't take self-responsibility, that puts their own authority external. And well, I think anybody who's listening who has a shred of history lesson can see
critical thinking.
Yeah, critical thinking and common sense knows that is very not only disempowering but dangerous. Right. And so we are at, I think, a very critical time in our world where we have not only a majority of people running this victim mentality, but it's being not only enabled but pushed.
Yeah, and celebrated.
Yes. And this is happening with the younger people. So this is part where I think pulling it into the younger generation is that the victim, the suffering, the self-tyranny is being celebrated and enabled and encouraged. And it is disastrous. Yeah. It is not only currently disastrous, but is going to become more disastrous because these are going to be the people leading the world in a few generations. Yeah. And so there's a lot of stuff. However, I do want to point out one thing that I think is really huge is that the younger generations are more open to talking about this. Correct. The younger generations are much, much more open to therapy, to coaching, to healing, to understanding trauma. Now, there's still a lot of victim-y, distorted stuff in there, but at least they can have the conversations where your fathers or grandfathers, these past generations of ours, those men were just, the men especially, were taught to close off. Now there is, obviously there's this flip-flop where those generations were completely shut off and shut down, but they could function in the world. They could go to war and protect us. And there was a lot of great masculinity that came with it. But nowadays that masculinity has become toxic and attacked and distorted and all of that stuff. And so we've gone into the other direction. And what I've seen is that it's not either. It's how can you be a fully developed masculine man, also a fully developed feminine woman, or whatever combination of that as you want, without going to the extremes and still being open in looking at ourselves and looking at other people and having these conversations. So I think both of those at play. We have a great opportunity here, and we are also in some trouble.
Yeah. I think what men went through traditionally in previous generations was the whole internalized emotion, right? Which is suck it up, buttercup, right? Yep. Leave your shit at the door. Don't cry over spilt milk. Like these were just, you did not share your emotions, which created a lot of problems. Like if you look at internalized emotion and stress, it can manifest into very unhealthy things, sickness and a number of others. So I think we swung the pendulum the other way, which is a healthy thing, which is the normalization of communicating emotions, expressing emotions, right? I've got a son today, 6 years old, and I see sometimes how that has swung too far with my wife, where we will argue and she'll be like, it's okay for him to have feelings. And I'm like, but at what expense? At where do we now cross the line of the feelings become more important about the responsibility, the monitoring of the behavior, or the management of position type of thing, right? So there's a fine line there.
Yeah. And and this is actually really important in what I talk about in my work, in my book, is feeling is incredibly important. Mm-hmm. But our culture, we use the same words to mean very different things. So there's a difference between our feelings and I feel this way about this, and feeling what we actually feel. What's the real emotion? And it's very easy to weaponize feelings, to manipulate with feelings, to use feelings to escape and bypass and all this stuff. That's not feeling. So when I talk about talking about this stuff and working with feeling, it's actually what's the truth of what you're feeling. Just report the details and let yourself feel the shame, the guilt, the sadness, whatever it is. That is healthy. That is empowering. That needs to be felt and experienced. It doesn't mean you air your dirty laundry. It doesn't mean you go on Twitter and complain about all your problems.
And attack.
Be hysterical, right? You can go into hysterics. A lot of people go into hysterics. They're not actually feeling. They're acting out the emotions. They're reacting to the feelings. So it's really important that and this is what I explain in my book, it's really important to understand the difference between our feelings and that true emotional depth and weight. Because if we look at what you said, responsibility, taking responsibility, showing up in the world, just doing what you have to do, because that's what adults do, being accountable, and that sort of just showing up in the world, not manipulating with it, not being reactive to it, and just feeling, that's the direction to go in.
Yeah, so powerful. I talk about emotional blackmail, which is, in your effort to get your feelings acknowledged, you're either hijacking or emotionally blackmailing. And at the end of the day, we don't actually end up resolving the thing that's going to manage or adjust the feeling, because we're looking for acknowledgement or the words escaping me, but approval, where your feelings are right, you're justified in right, and at that point we're not addressing the things that we need to address.
We're defending our stories.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. And we all have stories.
Yeah.
Right. I love what you're saying, which is, to be blunt, first get a hold of your stories. Recognize where these stories have built up from fantasy, where there's like this movie, because as we know, and you'll appreciate this, we think and we feel through stories, right? That's why stories are so powerful in a presentation. That's why when we're looking at marketing, the ad is telling a story, and this is where people are moved. And if it works from a marketing standpoint, then you can imagine how this works for our own identification and limiting life, belief in life, right? Yeah. So powerful. So let's move on. What are some best practices? I mean, what could I do if I'm the individual that is going through therapy, that is just continually in the cycle of therapy, and I'm not actioning it? It reminds me of law of attraction, right? Which everyone watched the movie or read the book, The Secret, right? Heard the concept of law of attraction. John Assaraf and David Meltzer told me this, which is, law of attraction only works with the rule of Goya, which is get off your ass. In other words, you can't just sit there manifesting and thinking and focusing on what you want to be if you're not going to action things. So there's a lot of actioning and responsibility and moving things forward. What could we do about this? What could we do to get out of the rabbit hole of self-help? What could we do to take more responsibility? What are the next steps in all of this?
Yeah, so we went over some of the, tell the truth. I mean, that's going to be the most, having the awareness, right? Having the self-awareness, telling the truth about where you're actually at. That's, if you can't do that, any actioning or steps you're going to take are going to make you more lost.
Mm-hmm.
So that is really the most important thing, telling the truth, having the self-awareness. The next step is, as I mentioned before, what are the things you're avoiding? This is a really easy thing. Well, it's a very simple thing to start with. It doesn't require any crazy technique or strategy or process. Just write a list or just think, because it's probably not going to be too hard. What are the biggest things you're avoiding doing in your life? And then do those. And if you can't do those, you're not going to move forward. Mm-hmm. You can start with small ones, make it easy for yourself. Just start with the small stuff, have common sense, build momentum, but start doing the things that you're avoiding. That is, if people just do that, a lot will change. Yeah. After that, or with that, or next to that, is going to be stopping. So if I could just share this, because I think it would be just very helpful, because it's so simple. I have a chapter in the book called Just Stop.
Yeah, I'm really I teach a stop concept, so I'm really interested to learn about just stopping.
Yeah, and so in here, it's a little obnoxious, but it's on purpose. I literally have just a list of what to stop. And when I say stop, there's two forms of stopping. The first is suppression, is clamping down, right? It's a block. You're stopping something from moving, okay? Then the second definition of stopping is to cease, to finish, to halt. You just end it. So once a blocking, right, you're stopping the emotions from coming up, versus you stop suppressing the emotions and allow them to come up. So when I talk about stopping, it's not that clenching, it's the ending, it's the halting, it's a letting go, it's a subtraction.
Cool.
So my philosophy is subtractive, not additive. It's removing, it's subtracting, it's stopping all of the things that we do where we're getting in our own way, where we're creating our own suffering. Because the other way of self-improvement is saying, I'm not enough. I have to acquire and do and learn and attach and become all of these new things because I don't already have what it takes. Mm-hmm. And this process is the opposite. You stop. So here's a list of just some of the things. Again, these are all practical, applicable action steps. Now, they're not necessarily easy. All right, so here's a list. I'll not say everything, but here's some of it.
Here's some of the main ones.
Here's a list of what to stop. Stop suffering. Just that one alone. That's like Buddhism, that. But really, stop suffering. Stop using your stories to validate your suffering. Stop thinking too much. Stop trying to do it right. Stop looking for a magic pill. Stop looking for a way to skip the discomfort. Stop lying to yourself. Stop overanalyzing. Stop trying to fix yourself, others, and the world. Stop trying to understand everything. Stop blaming and complaining. Stop telling the same story over and over. Stop shoulding all over yourself. Stop waiting until you're ready. Stop trying to be perfect. Stop trying to control everything. Stop beating yourself up. Stop judging. Stop avoiding. Stop holding your breath. Stop putting on a show. Stop cultivating a persona or just a better mask. Stop building walls and putting on armor. Stop the noise and drama. Stop censoring and throttling. Stop the addictions. Stop hiding out and playing small. Stop distorting reality. Stop manipulating. Stop defending and justifying. Stop living in a Right, and I got half more.
Awesome.
But literally, if you start stopping all of those things and you start facing the things that you've been avoiding, those two things alone If you do that for a month, your life will look completely different.
Yeah. No kidding. I was going to ask you earlier, like, you see some common things when of people avoiding, and I think you've just nailed it through the stopping, right? Which is, we tend to do more of these things. One of the things I teach in emotional intelligence and management, there's a process, we call it the stop concept, coincidentally, right? And it's a process for us to go through, but it begins with pausing the instinctive reaction. And, you know, if I was to relate it to some of my work right now, that's what you're talking about, right? There's this instinctive or unconscious thing people do, right? Blaming, avoiding, judging, taking responsibility. And if that is your natural or your unconsciousness, right, that unconscious response or reaction, that's what you got to pause. That's what you got to catch.
Interrupt it, yeah.
Interrupt it. Love the fact you use the word interrupt it. We use the word like cut the wire, right? Like snip it so there's no current going through, right? And one of the things that we talk about stopping, and I hear you saying this as well, which is, you are not stopping to freeze and to paralyze and to not move and to stop feeling. You are stopping in order to go. The same way when you come to a stop sign, you stop, you look around, and now you go, you accelerate, you move forward. So it's not to limit, but it is actually to move forward. So simple and so powerful, Andrew. Awesome, brother.
Yeah, and we just overcomplicate these things. I mean, in the book too, because I not only write a book about this, I work with clients, so I have a practice doing something called Cinesomatics, an embodiment practice with movement and video. And working with clients, one of the things I hear a lot is that, I'll say, they'll start manipulating or telling a story. Well, I can't, and I say, just stop. And that stopping, one of the things it's also designed to do is to quiet. You stop the noise and the drama. And as you stop all of that stuff, this is kind of one of the points of meditation. You quiet. The closer you get to the silence and the stillness, the closer you are to being able to access that intuition, that inner voice, that truth. And also, ironically, the closer you are to peace. The more noise and drama and movement, hectic movement you're creating, the more drama and suffering you're going to be in. I tell the story, imagine being an ant, on a cartwheel. So you have a cart and there's a wheel on it. At the axle, if you can be that ant at just the most center of that axle, you're going to be nearly still. If you're the ant and you're on the rim, on the edge of that wheel, your life is going to go like this.
Right.
And this is how a lot of people are living. Every little thing just throws them into this. But if you can stop all of that stuff and you can get stiller and stiller and quieter and quieter, when there's a bump on the road, you're not affected by it. The world isn't affecting you. You're not blocking the world off. You're still open. You're feeling it. You're empathic. You're present to the world. You're still experiencing it. You're not hiding away, shut off, armored up, closed off. But you're not at the effect of it.
Right.
And the way to that is stopping. And a lot of people, they say, well, how do you stop? I mean, but this is the ego, Greg. This is the ego. It comes in. Well, how do you stop? What's the process? Give me the 17 steps to stopping. You just stop. But on the way to stopping, we have our stories, our addictions, our fears, our limitations, all of this stuff. And so if you can get to the stopping, not the pausing, you don't stop smoking 14 times. You paused, stop it, you smoking 13 times.
Right.
Stopping is stopping. And if you can get there, well, on the journey to the stopping, there's going to be all this healing. There's going to be all of this growth.
Love that.
But it's just stopping. Yeah, you just have to stop.
Love that. So simple. It's like the rule KISS, right? We even leave the last S off. Just keep it simple.
Yeah.
We don't even need to add the extra S on there,
Yeah.
right? Keep it simple. Stop. Recognize, take responsibility. And, this is, I sometimes tell people, they go, so what do you do for a living? And I say, I teach common sense. And they go, well, what does that mean? I go, well, this, and you'll give examples, emotional management or communication, or, okay, yeah. Well, this is what makes so much sense. The problem is, as human beings, and I love the way you're describing it, besides complicating things, we build up our narrative through our story in order to validate and justify our feelings or reaction of those feelings, and therefore allowing us to remain the victim, which is, you see, the course didn't work, or I need a new book, or this is the added thing.
I knew it.
Right? I knew it. I knew it wasn't going to work, right? I told you so. And sometimes, if we're not careful, we surround ourselves with people that reinforce those stories, right? Which is, you see Tony Robbins or that course or the thing. None of this works. It's all gobbledygook. And it's what we do with all of this information. And I think that's a really powerful message for the audience, which is, it's not that the self-help program doesn't work or the book doesn't work. It's the fact that you're not taking enough responsibility to allow yourself to utilize some of these tools effectively. And any tool is going to be difficult to use, right? That's the work, right? The tools don't make it easier. The tools give us access for the result. It's the effort of continually using the tools and taking responsibility on how to use them properly, right? Like driving a car, right? There's a responsibility in how you drive that. You can speed, but it's what you do with that. Super powerful. Andrew, tell us a little bit about your company and the work that you're doing with clients.
Yeah. So I'm the director at the Center for Cinesomatic Development. So let's just start with that. What is cinesomatics? I mentioned it earlier because many people haven't heard of it yet. So cinesomatics, let's just start with the name. Cinesomatics. It comes from cine, which in this instance is about video. Cinema also has origins in Greek and meaning movement, just like kino or movement.
Yeah, kinesiology.
Yeah. And then somatics, which is of the body. So it's basically using movement and video in the body. Okay, so that's just the word. Pretty easy to understand that. But what is it? What's the whole point? So it's a therapeutic modality. It's a philosophy. It's a life perspective and transformational approach that uses video, movement, feeling, and feedback to help clients see the hidden stories, mythologies. So mythologies are essentially the overarching stories that run our lives and even generations and cultures. Archetypes, the blind spots, the shadow material, the hidden blocks and plateaus. And it does it not by talking about it. It does it by movement. So what we do is that we'll film somebody moving. It could be a dance. It could be on a slack line. We have all these special movements and diagnostics. So we record the person moving in their body. Then we play that video back and we sit down with them in a private one-on-one or in a group workshop. We play that video back, and what I'm doing is I'm giving them feedback about all of that unconscious, all of that subconscious material that's running their life, that's showing up in their body. And I'm doing that by feeling it. I'm not in my head with a list going down saying, all right, well, this body language position means this, 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 and this. I'm actually feeling that subconscious data that comes through their movements, reflecting it back in my feedback, and then they get to see it for themselves in their own body on video. So it's not just listening to a guru or a coach or a therapist that you just kind of have to blindly trust.
Right.
They get to see it for themselves in their own body. And then from there, that alone can be tremendous. That alone, seeing, oh, look at the way I'm moving. I'm playing really small. Oh, look at the way I'm moving. I'm actually not allowing or accepting the compliment or the love or the money in. Oh,
Mm.
look at that. When I'm playing bigger and bigger, I'm dumping all the money in, taking myself out. Oh, look when I'm interacting with that person. I'm actually being passive aggressive. Oh, I'm being narcissistic. Oh, I'm manipulating. All of these things are happening. Oh, look at that. These two people are interacting. This is that dynamic that's creating. They have no idea that they're seducing and manipulating each other subconsciously. They think they're just being nice. Whatever all of this stuff is, it gets revealed through the movement and the feedback.
Cool.
And it is very confronting, but it is also a process that works when nothing else doesn't. Because we're not just talking about it. We're actually demonstrating it practically in their own body, and they get to see it for themselves. So it's very accelerated and also very confronting, but it works.
Super interesting, man. Man, I could spend hours with you after this, like just geeking out in this whole sort of world of like.
Let's do it.
Yeah, modalities and training, but very interesting. What a powerful sort of feedback loop that gives you, right?
Yes.
And you were describing it, which is as people are going through these movements, so you could physically see that, and it's so powerful because most people, and we see this when they see videos or they hear themselves from an audio standpoint, it's a completely different effect on them, right? Yeah. Very cool, man. Very cool. And I'm assuming you're dealing with clients that are coming from, in some cases, severe traumas, all the way up to just the absence of awareness and just, not having things happen as effectively as they want. They're not finding the success that they're looking for.
Yeah, there's a wide range of people. We work with athletes. We work with people in Hollywood, directors. We work with CEOs, entrepreneurs. We work with retired stay-at-home moms. It is not inexpensive. It is very advanced work. It's not for beginners. So we work with people that generally have done this work, not that work, but have done self-help, spirituality. They're familiar with all those concepts already. They have a certain level of success in their life. And yet, for some reason, it doesn't match over, or they've reached a plateau, or they've reached a material success, but inside they feel hollow, or they feel like a fraud, or the relationships aren't working, or they have great relationships, but they've reached a plateau in their business. So it is based on the principle of how you do one thing is how you do everything. And so when someone comes in and one area of their life isn't working, the work that we do, as they penetrate that, as they break through that, it affects all the other areas of their life that was connected to. So we have people that come in, they don't even realize they have trauma. They're just like, I'm need to break through to 8 figures or whatever. Right. It's like, okay, great. Well, let's do this stuff. And then we find out, okay, the dad, abused them. I've had people where their mother was drowning them, just some of the deepest, darkest things imaginable. And to them, they just have no idea. It's been normalized and suppressed so much in their life. But when I see them move, it's obvious. Oh, yeah, of course you can't get to that level because this is holding you back. This trauma is suppressing you, because if you break through that, it's going to invalidate all of those stories of your suffering and struggle. So all of these things start to happen. And so people come in for one thing, and then we realize, their whole life starts to transform.
I just said something which is such a mind F, which is, when they acknowledge all these traumas and scenarios and situations, in some cases, it invalidates their go forward plan, which is like, I need to let this all go. I can't believe this anymore. I can't keep telling the story. So that's a big pivotal moment for someone. Very powerful, super powerful. If people wanted to learn more about this, where can they find out more information?
Just, 2 places. One, my website, andrewdaniel.org, has stuff about me, stuff about my book. You can get my book there. There's also a link to Cinesomatics.org, and that explains the actual modality I was just talking about. So that's one aspect of the work I do. I do some other things as well, and you can get that all on my website.
Cool. We'll make sure that we got all your links and everything in the show notes.
Great. Thank you.
Andrew, I could keep you here for another few hours, but we've got to be respectful of time, and maybe we'll just get a part 2 scheduled to come back to the podcast.
Excellent.
But at the end of the show or end of each episode, we ask the most important question, which is, what do you think we could do to all be better humans tomorrow?
Well, I'll go back to what I said, and make truth the most important thing. Truth, love, taking responsibility. These things, if you hold these concepts, if you hold those principles, if you hold these values above everything else, it's going to be really, really hard to falter in your life. It may not be easy. It may not be fun all the time, but you will be a better human if you make love, truth, and you start taking responsibility. The most important things.
Love that responsibility, which you threw in there as well, which is, none of this happens without the foundation of responsibility, right? No substitute for taking responsibility. And as they say, the truth will set you free.
Yep. But first it might piss you off.
Which is good, right? Because then there'll be action. Amazing.
Exactly.
All right. To the audience, go check out andrewdaniel.org. And with lots of information on his book there. As mentioned, I just picked up his book. I'm well into it. It's an awesome, awesome, awesome book so far. It speaks and is eye-opening when it comes down to the work we have to do and the work we don't have to do sometimes as well, which is awesome. As usual, we will be back next week with another amazing guest. But what always helps the show is if you like it, if you subscribe to it, and then if you share it. If Andrew has shared some inspirational moments, get it out to friends, share the love and help other people be better humans. Go follow Andrew Daniel. You'll find him on Instagram and all the other social platforms as well. And Andrew, man, once again, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Greg.
Yeah, anytime. All right, audience, we will see you next week.